Welcome, everybody. This is part of a series of discussions about community security being sponsored by the Asset-Based Community Development Institute at DePaul University. I'm a board member of the Institute, and I'm joined by Tom Moskaller, who is a faculty member at the Institute and is related to our discussion today because he was at one time the Director of Organizational Development and Training at the City of Madison, and that city's activity is what we're focused on. You know, today we hear a great deal about abolishing the police or reforming the police. And yet I think there's a third possibility, and that is transforming the police, rethinking what is the function of a police department. And one of the great inventors of this way of refunctioning is with us today. It's David Couper, who is now retired, but the longtime chief of police in Madison, Wisconsin. Incidentally, he's also written a book that can be a guide to people who want to audit their own police department. The book is called How to Rate Your Local Police. And I'm sure that would be a valuable piece for those who are interested in the question of community security. So, David, welcome. And how long were you head of the chief? How long were you chief of police in Madison?
I was in Madison for 21 years, John. And I was a police chief in a small suburb of Minneapolis for 4 years before I came to Madison.
And when you got to Madison, what would you say was the state of the relationship between the police department and the communities in Madison?
Well, like most communities, those that have little to no contact with police love them. But it is remarkably so that those that have the most contact with them have the least trust and respect for them. So we were at war with the students who didn't like the police, and with the poor and the minority community in the city. So there was a big gap. They had fought for years over the war, and it was they were really antagonistic towards one another.
And so they were law enforcement people, these police. You had a different idea as to what they might be. And
Sure.
Can you tell us about the alternative idea of what is a policeman's function?
Well, first of all, the word law enforcement just rankles me because that's a very small part of what police do, and consequently, those who see themselves as warriors, they see themselves as law enforcing officers. I see police more as social workers with guns. I see them as being guardians of the community, working with the community, and working in such a close relationship that the community trusts and support them. And I've said and written for years that the function of policing in a free society is absolutely impossible unless police are trusted and supported by the communities they police. And you learn this very quickly as a young police officer is unless people respect you and trust you, they're not willing to talk to you. And when they don't talk to you, you can't solve any crimes.
And you developed this notion that the alternative to being the typical kind of police officer was somebody whose role was as a peacekeeper. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. Well, most of what police do is handle disputes. They're all the way from, his tree branch is over on my property, and we're arguing about how this branch is going to be cut off and who's going to do it, and we're really mad. And now somebody has called the police because we're out in our front yard shouting at one another to please come. My friend has been murdered. So the range is extensive. So you've got to have people who, first of all, have a strong level of emotional intelligence. I love the work that's been done in that field of emotional intelligence. Able to empathize with other people, able to listen to somebody, make good decisions, monitor the relationship and how it's going. And then they have to be, they have to be educated. They've got to know the big picture. They've got to know that once upon a time, police were slave patrollers. That's where they started. It was many, many years before a public police was formed in Philadelphia and New York. So their legacy is not good to people that they have a large amount of contact with. And then they have to be well trained. They have to be well led by also mature leaders. They have to have a sense of compassion and understanding about the nature of the job. And they have to be particularly respectful to people and very, very cautious in how force is used to get the job done. And that goes back over 150 years when Sir Robert Peel in the UK was formulating the first public police in London, and he, at that time, one of his 12 principles of policing was, or the 9 principles of policing. I've got 12. 9 principles of policing was that the more force is used to get your job done, the less support you will have within the community. And that's where we are today. Exactly it. Too much force is used to get the job done. Therefore, we are experiencing less trust and support.
So you come into Madison with this kind of understanding of the peacekeeper as a definition of a police role. How did you go about implementing that? Cities often are bureaucracies, not very flexible. How'd you do it?
Well, it was hell, that's for sure. I mean, it was the first 2 years. They probably spent most of their time trying to get me into court, trying to fire me for all kinds of reasons. And yeah, it was hell. All the captains were the age of my father. I was 35 years old when I came to Madison. One of the blessings I found it within a few years, I said, thank God for World War II. And so we said, well, why World War II? He said, because let's see, 1944, 1945, 55, 65, 30 years, 75, these guys are going to be retiring. And within 75 through 78, most of my command staff retired. I didn't bring anybody with me, and I was able to, find within the ranks some educated younger people who had the same idea. They shared the vision that I did. Here's the vision. You like this or don't you? That's crazy. Well, I don't need you on the team, but if you can buy into this vision, we're gonna build a great police department here. And that's why one of the first of my 7 steps in how to improve our nation's police in my book, Arrested Development, talked about that. Number 1, envision. The leader envisions. What is the vision and what is the expectation for realizing this vision?
And David, John, can I ask you a quick question of David? So please. David, how did you come to this philosophy?
Well, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrow. I was a Minneapolis cop for 7 years. I came from a suburban department where I policed rich people, and the chief said, your job there is to be respectful to people and be honest and always obey the law. Don't, and oh, great place to learn how to be a cop is in a rich suburb, because rich people will not take the stuff from police that they can do in the Black community. So I came into Minneapolis in 1962 and saw there was two styles of policing. There was that policing that I did in Edina, a rich suburb of Minneapolis, and that we did in South Minneapolis, where the white people lived. But there was another different style of policing on the north side of the city, where the Black people lived. And in 1968, when Dr. King was killed, assassinated down there in Memphis, I was on the street and worked the street during those times. Decided that we've got to change our behavior, that this was not working anymore, and was able to get a few people, as I was attending the university at the same time, to kind of share this idea that we can be respectful to people, and guess what? Maybe our jobs will become safer, because unless we changed our behavior, people in North Minneapolis would start killing us. So I think it was one of those come to Jesus moments, Tom. I think it really was. I mean, I saw, and I think the reason I did the contrast of being on campus with SDS students for Democratic Society, some Black Panthers, and that as I was going to class, and then having the different world of working on the street at night, caused me just to have a different dream. I've always thought police were important, that they were, and I've even said they're the glue that can hold a community together. If they're out there operating in a just and compassionate and reasonable way, they actually model the values of our society, at least the values that we say we have. I guess I'll have to wait until this November election, John, to find out whether or not those values are real or they're a myth. And, okay, we'll see.
So you, the first thing that you did to transform the department was to find people, in this case, younger people, who had the same vision you had, the kind of vision you just expressed. And yeah. So you have a nucleus of leadership with the same vision. Where'd you go from there?
Yeah. So that was a real tough decision, because people in their ranks had to step out from the union and out from the negativity of the rank and file and say, we used to say in Minneapolis, I'm gonna hook my wagon to your rising star. and in Minneapolis, the joke was all the time, whenever there was a new mayor's election and the entire command staff turned over, these guys would come back to our briefing. I was a detective then. They'd say, "All right, Joe, I guess you hooked your wagon to the wrong star." And Joe would say, "Yeah, if so-and-so had won, I'd be a deputy chief." And I really didn't want to have that to be the way in which the department was run. So anyway, to make the story shorter, is there were young men and women who stepped out from the ranks and said, "Yes, I want to join." And they had to have some confidence in me that I was going to stick around, because it's really a career. If I was only around for a couple of years, their careers would be terminated right then.
Yep.
So I knew I had that's why I stayed there for 21 years, is I had a responsibility to the people who said, I will hook on to your program here. I had a responsibility to those people. That's why I say for a chief, passion is very important. Patience and persistence, and to set the mission of the department and the vision. I remember, towards the years when we started doing community policing, we started talking about, what's the vision statement? The vision statement is closer to the people we serve. Everything you do, everything you think about has got to get you closer to the people we serve. Now, how do we do that? And then Deming came along, and Tom came on board, and we found a structure, a teaching structure that was based on data and customer evaluation. We looked at the importance about the training and about developing people to be facilitators. So we never had an important meeting there for about 7 or 8 years that didn't have a trained facilitator. And I never had a top decision-making management team that did not have, coming from their ranks, a trained facilitator. I mean, organizationally, that's astounding, because me as the team leader, wants to stay on the agenda. I want to get through this agenda, and that facilitator will say, "Whoa, let's do a check-in here. How does everybody feel about this? And we haven't heard from you for a while. What's going on?" That stuff is worth its weight in gold.
Now you get your team and you get this vision made more specific. Imagine I'm a police officer out in a district. How does it come down to me? How do you get me to be the implementer of your vision?
Sure. So that's like managing by wandering around, the MBWA stuff. So it's like coming down to the I can tell you a story. Coming down to the day shift, which has primarily senior patrol officers, and laying out my vision. And after a few months, and there'd be somebody in the back row would say, "Yeah, Chief, but you're just making our job more dangerous by having us work with these people and having us back off when these demonstrations happen." And I'd say, "Well, Joe, I just," and I remember this because I thought it was a good strategy. I said, "Joe, when I came here 2 years ago, your wives told me in a meeting that we had that they were embarrassed to say that their husbands were police officers." Now I'm just asking you one thing right now after 2 years. Does your wife still do that, or does she say that, "I'm proud that my husband is a Madison police officer"? And that evidently hit a chord at that time, because they were reaping the benefits about the professional police, about hiring college graduates. They even though they didn't have college degrees, they were part of this new team, and they benefited from this. So it's the other really tough moment was to try to check after I'd been there about 8 years. I was like, about 8 years. And my wife, who I was newly married to, she had left the department. She was a member of the department. She went over and worked for the Capitol Police, and she had a different view. And there's kind of a story I remember saying to her when I was on leave, and we went and had a cup of coffee up around the Capitol Square, and so I said, "Well, why did you agree to have a cup of coffee with me? What was that about?" And she said, "Well, I really want to know, David, if you were as big an asshole as everybody thought you were." And so years later, I said, "Well, am I still that big asshole?" And she said, "Well, you've gotten better." But part of that was her, encouraging me to talk to people down in the ranks. So I did 26 meetings with employees of the police department in terms of part of the quality movement we were involved in. It was terrible. I mean, every night I wanted to go home and just curl up in a fetal position and cry in bed. But I learned some things, and I learned what I needed to do to get even better support from them in the direction we were going. One of which was that we needed to improve the promotional system. And I thought that was a problem, because I wanted to loosen it up so so younger people could come up the ranks. That's what they wanted too. They didn't want what the union wanted. They didn't want that seniority. So that was a big, and the other problem was me. So I had to make some changes in me, some internal changes. Yeah, it was, those were big times.
So David,
Yeah.
what changes did you make in you?
Well, I think when we went back, we started an elected officer advisory group to advise me on a monthly basis. I put the union head on my management team. The mayor said that's the dumbest thing that you've ever done. That mayor that we both love very well. He said that was the dumbest thing I've ever seen you do. And I said, it's going to be hell for 1 year, Paul, because he's going to be in that and he's going to sass me. And when the rank and file finds out that we're really listening to people, they're going to start electing union presidents who are smart and educated. And that's exactly what they did. And they did that for the rest of the 12 years I was there. So we actually got the union on board because they saw that their self-interest was also mine. And those were big changes. And it also I took, because we didn't have any women in the command ranks, we only had one woman in the command structure, and we needed more women's voices. I took and pulled a white gay female and a black African American police officer out of the ranks as my assistants, and that was a big move. It caused people who had supported me for a number of years and considered themselves to be on the old team, the first backers of Couper when he came here, found out there was a new act in town, and these people had a voice because and actually got the officers to accept that and say, look, we've got to bring women's voices into here because we don't have that many yet. And we've got to bring voices of minority officers in. And this was one way to do it. And I really, I got by with that. I don't think many chiefs could get by with that.
Did you change the gender of your hiring pattern? Did you begin to bring in more women?
Yeah, absolutely. Now here's the story. This is the hard story. So when I came to the department, we had one black officer. We had 7 women who worked as youth officers. The women, contrary to the men, had to have a 4-year bachelor's degree. They could not carry a firearm, and they could not stand for promotion. So talk about a perfect civil rights storm here. So all those years, 21 years, the rule was that half of every new hire class, half of every class of officers must be people of color or women. And if they didn't do that, and I had to a couple times saying, we're not going ahead, go back, try again. We've got to have more women, more people of color. Even then, when I left the department, after 20 years of that work, the number of minority officers went from less than 1% to about 10%. And the number of women went from 0, except for the 6 or 7 who were then youth officers, to 25% of the department. And after I'd retired, the department went up to as high as 35%. I think it's dropped a little bit down now, but they have maintained that high participation of women, which is the greatest, most positive change to policing has been the advent of women into police work. There was a good book written the other day. I was trying to figure out how many do you need? Is one woman on your board of directors enough? It is 2. No, it's got to be about 20%. And there's this book, it's called Broad Influence. And I can't think of her name. She's a journalist. And she looked at the military, and she looked at government and corporate offices and the police. And unless women are about 20% of the assembled group, they don't have a voice. They really don't find their voice until there's 20%. And to me, that just makes common sense. But there's some empirical work here. That was the experience in the military. When the Navy put women on ships of war, the first commanders say it was crazy. There were so few of them. And when we got up to about 20%, things settled down on the ship and we started working together. I thought that was phenomenal, that bit of learning.
Fascinating. Tom, you were working with the city at the very same time. And I wonder if there are other things that you saw that took place that seemed important in terms of this transformation.
Well, 2 things come to mind, John. Well, 3 things. When I first met David, it must have been the early 80s, David. I was a community organizer before I was hired by the city. And I remember going into David's office, and David had a picture of Gandhi and a picture of Martin Luther King up behind his desk. Big pictures, not just little portraits, big pictures. And I said, well, I said to myself, this guy is different. So I just wanted to share that story. And I had a kindred spirit with David because I had come out of, during the Vietnam era, I was a military police sergeant. So I had an appreciation, at least a cursory, from a different view of policing and that particular role in a community. The 2 things I wanted to share was, David, I'm not sure when or how we did this, but the story I always tell is when that vision of shifting from law enforcement as the emphasis to peacekeeping, and the power of that envisioning, and who was in the, how did that come? Did that just come out of the head of David, head of David? Or I remember us getting together and actually holding gatherings where we had some pretty hard discussions about that. And then some of the underlying values of educate first, regulate only if we must, and how transformative that became once we put it in practice. So let me stop there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that came around the importance to try to, the number one problem facing the department, was not minority hiring. It was, what are you going to do about the protests? So one of the police commissioners, Stuart Becker, said, told me 2 things. He said, remember, there's 2 ends to State Street. There's the Capitol and there's the university. Really important. And he said, I want you to know that going into the Dow Chemical demonstration, that was the one where a number of students were hospitalized and a number of police officers were also hospitalized. When the students crammed into a building where Dow Chemical, the makers of napalm in Vietnam War, was recruiting students to come to work for Dow Chemical, to have a great career in chemistry. And the police department, unprepared, was called in to back up the university police. And a bedlam started. The police started there was pushing and shoving. The police got scared. They pulled their sticks out and started randomly clubbing students. And there's a classic picture of about 150 students surrounding a couple of officers that were just beating some students around the ground. It was terrible. He said to me, he said, David, the first day of the demonstrations on campus, the issue was the war. The second day, it became the police, and it became the police for the rest of the demonstrations.
Huh.
So I think this is a big part of me thinking about, well, then we need to keep the peace. And that's when we started the soft approach to responding first to protests by officers in blazers, working with the organizers, trying to tell we were here to protect your right to protest. I mean, it's entirely different than what happened in Portland and in Seattle or any of these other cities, even in Ferguson. So here, all these years later, we had written about, called the Madison Method, the importance of being a peacekeeper, of listening to people, having very low-key strategies. That was the way in which we did things, and people started writing articles about that. I never had any empirical backup of that, other than, and here's the data: 21 years in Madison. I don't know how many demonstrations, how many Halloweens, but we never lost control of the street.
Yeah.
In 21 years. Okay. So who I ran into after I was writing my blog was a guy from the UK called Professor Clifford Stott. And I think he started out at the University of Liverpool, but he started looking at football crowds in the UK. And, you know, the great style of, Arsenal and so beating up, you know, they would come in there and they would mix in the stadium, they get into fights and everything. So he started to get a strategy that we certainly would have used. And as he started separating and having separate parts of the stadium so that they could shout at each other without throwing rocks at each other and curse one another. And as they were getting to the station, there was a like 20-yard phalanx of police separating the groups, and they could shout at one another, but they weren't close enough to punch one another. And they got into the stadium, and then they have the same exit strategy. And so he started calling this the softly approach. And he said, like, softly always works. And I don't know this, I think the story he tells, or a story that came up as we were doing these discussions, he said, think about it. You've got a couple of rowdies in the stadium. They're maybe 3 or 4 guys. They're drinking too much. They're obnoxious. They're spilling beer on all the people that are sitting around them. And people are saying to themselves, why don't the cops come and get these people out of here? My God, they're so obnoxious. And all you have to do in that situation is send 2 officers in, preferably a male and a female officer, who kind of walk down the aisle there and say, sir, you guys are going to have to stop behaving yourself. And people start saying, yes, you listen to the cops, you behave yourselves. You put 5 officers in body armor and helmets to calm those guys down, and you got a fight going.
That's
so
a great.
It's a matter of strategy. It's a matter of, you know, being able to, you know, to have the emotional intelligence and to practice something that we talk about a lot about recently, procedural justice. You know, how people who have authority over other people can keep their trust and respect in decision making. A powerful tool that police know about, but somehow, you know, I don't know. I hope we're going to have some time to talk about organizational change, because I think that's the most difficult thing here. The police are so insular. You know, I've seen my own department now for the last 20 years resist, hunker in, don't make the changes. And I have written about this. I think the most important question that has yet to be answered since 2014, when Michael Brown was left for 3 hours bleeding on the street in Ferguson, Missouri, is it comes from the Black community, and it's this question: when are you going to stop killing us? We want to know. We want to know, because you can't keep on killing us like this. So that's been the question that's been out there. I've yet to hear it answered, that we're willing to raise the standard of the use of deadly force in this country to that of the European Union, which all European Union countries must sign on. And the statement is that their police will use deadly force only when absolutely necessary. Absolute necessity. We're under a 1989 Supreme Court decision, which talks about it being reasonable objectiveness, which is in fact, if an officer feels threatened, he or she can terminate the situation up to and including using deadly force. That might be the law, but it's awful. And I don't think citizens in this country who are the recipients of this type of force, mainly people of color, are going to accept this anymore. It's just not going to work. We just had a shooting down in Illinois. I think it was Illinois. Illinois State Police, a traffic stop. I don't know the particulars, but as it was reported to me in my little professional organization, the Police Executive Research Forum, reporting this, is that the officer was getting out of the car and the car that he was stopped started backing towards the officer. I don't know at what speed or whatever. And the officer returned fire, killing one and injuring the other. Well, I just don't think that's acceptable. I just think you got to step out of the way. Number one, you don't know who's in the car. There could have been 5 kids in the back seat. So why would we ever shoot multiple shots into a car that we don't know who's inside? And do we really want to kill people for running away from police? So that's an argument I've had with my colleagues since Ferguson days, is that you've got to raise the standard. You've got to let the community know you're going to raise the standard. You've got to stand up and say, I will be responsible for raising this standard. And you can look at the data. The problem is the data since 2014, we never knew how many people were killed by police each year. And a couple of journalists finally did that. Now there's The Guardian and Washington Post is in fact counting each and every one of these shootings and found out there are about 1,000. It was about 1,000 in 2014, 2015 about 1,000, 2016 about 1,000, 2017 about 1,000, 2018 about 1,000, all the way up to this past year. I think one good measure would be that we would kill less people every year. Rate-wise, we're quite high. Most European police departments do not have the level of taking citizens' lives that we do. And I don't know, it's like, I can't get any traction. I can't get police to deal with this. Even when I give them this example, in 1973, when we were deeply involved in policy development, we wrote a policy contrary to Wisconsin law. It was stricter than Wisconsin state law. Wisconsin state law, like most states, permitted police to shoot at and take the life of any fleeing dangerous felon, regardless of what the felony was. So police were shooting kids stealing cars because they were felons. Police were shooting kid burglars running out of the back of houses because they were fleeing felons. We said no, and a number of us who were police chiefs in the country started writing a policy that said, you can only use deadly force to stop a fleeing dangerous felon. In 1984, years later, the US Supreme Court changed the law of the land in these states and said it was unconstitutional for police to shoot people who were not dangerous. So our policy was more restrictive than the Wisconsin state law, and we quit shooting people who were non-dangerous. We shot very little people in the 21 years. But the idea was, well, the law permitted me. I said, yes, officer, that's true. The law does permit you to shoot a fleeing dangerous felon, but this police department and this city does not. And if you do this, you will not be charged with a crime, but I will do everything I can to fire you from this department. And with those kind of attitudes about the importance of the sanctity of life, you'd think that there'd be some movements in police being able to actually reduce the number of people who are killed each year. Because until we do that, until we get these deaths down, we're not going to have peace on the streets. And we just cannot permit this to happen. And it happens again and again. And I've watched it now for the last 6 years.
David,
That was kind of a long response.
You obviously have gotten over toward the edge, pushed things as far as you could. uh, brought a different logic to the whole issue. You were in Madison for quite a while, over 20 years, and you had a couple of mayors, I know, and a city council that must have been changing. You have a little advice for people who are concerned about getting somebody like you into a police department? How did you convince or influence the mayors and the city council especially to be supportive of sort of a radical transforming set of activities? What's
Well,
key?
I think what changed in me is that, I mean, I came out of Minneapolis, came out of a small department. Everybody was together. I mean, I was part of the culture. There's no doubt about that. The cops went along with other people, with other officers. You didn't fight and try to fire your chief. So when I came to Madison, these cops wanted to get rid of me. Where's the camaraderie? Where's that blue culture that I thought we had here? So somehow me being an outsider made me different. But I was an outsider that had some experience. I mean, I was a tactical squad officer in Minneapolis. I mean, I used to tell them, you tell me how tough it is. How many cops got shot in these demonstrations, because I was in situations in Minneapolis where we were getting shot. So don't tell me how tough things are. But when that happened, I had to figure out that I had to find support someplace else. And the only reason I lasted 21 years is because I had tenure. Every mayor wanted to fire me at least once. Every mayor. Yeah, every mayor wanted to fire me at least once. So it's important, and that why it's not going to happen today is a mayor will appoint a progressive police chief, and he or she will start making changes in the police department, and the police union will organize, and they will go to the mayor and they will say, we will not support you in the next election unless you can get rid of this guy. And that's what happens. I see great leaders in these last few years. A lot of them women and chiefs of color getting just eviscerated within a very short time because the mayor couldn't stand the pushback the change takes, and that's really unfortunate. So what I did is I started a number of community groups. I also had two great law professors at the University of Wisconsin Law School, Frank Remington and Herman Goldstein, who were my colleagues, but also my mentors. These mentors. Herman just died this past year, God rest his soul, and Frank a number of years ago. They were big losses. I had the university, law school, and Department of Sociology. I was a sociologist coming from Minnesota. I had them listening to what was going on. I put radical student leaders on community relations committees. I remember, again, going to one of those day shifts. All right, Chief, you put her name was Holly. You put Holly Lassie on your community group. She's a rock thrower. And I said, has she been throwing rocks lately at you? Well, no. I said, well, she probably won't, because we're listening to her now. She doesn't have to throw rocks at us to get us to listen to her.
Very good. Very good. This has been a wonderful exploration of a quiet revolution that you've inspired. I wonder, if people who are listening are trying to do something to get their local force transformed, what are the 2-3 things in conclusion that you would say are most important to get the transformation to happen?
Well, it's a lot of work for a citizen group to try to change their police department. I'm not saying impossible, but it's really difficult. The problem is where we had this change after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. The cry went to defund, eliminate the police. Police should have grabbed that narrative and said, no, let us together reimagine police. What is the police that you'd like? Let's sit down and talk. And maybe we can together make the kind of police department that we're both going to be proud of. So we were not able to do that. And I would say that I think the word is reimagine, because policing is a stodgy status quo work. So I think that it's important to talk about reimagining. And then I would say, you need to read my book, Arrested Development. It's free on my blog. It's free there. It's a free download PDF. I don't get any money from this, but it's got these ideas. And my blog, improvingpolice.blog. It's got 1,500 posts. It's had over 500,000 views in the last 9 years. This is our 9th year with this blog. And about 1,700 or 1,800 people follow that blog. I don't think many cops do. But in that blog are the ideas to craft a responsive, accountable police department that works closely with you, concerned about you, and will guard you and help you build the kind of safe and crime-free communities we all want.
That's wonderful. Say it again, the website, so everybody.
It's called improvingpolice.blog. Improvingpolice.blog.
Well, that's what we need to conclude this, because anybody who's interested further can go and look at the blog and look at the book and begin to see how the transforming idea may be the best of the possibilities in terms of our future. I want to thank you, David, for joining us, and Tom for throwing in as well. And we hope that our listeners now will have a new vision as to the possibilities of what people who have authority and guns ought to be doing in a neighborhood, right? So thanks very much. And we appreciate your joining us.